So, Jujutsu Kaisen. Where to begin with this one? I mean, it's only a worldwide sensation that features sorcerers who turn their angst into power and fight curses that look so deformed and ugly that it makes titans resemble models. Of course, when I say curses, I don't mean all of them. My glorious king Mahito and Jogoats are the exception that manage to break the ugly streak that seems to plague the rest of their kind like a curse. Get it? Because they are
like curses and why do I even bother sometimes?
In any case, the manga has finally ended, and as someone who has a small channel hoping to capitalize on the huge wave of controversy that is the JJK's ending, I want to share my thoughts on the matter. Please like and comment, subscribe if you haven't already. Pretty please.
No, I don't think I will.
Thank you. And now, without dawdling any further, let's begin, shall we? So, I doubt you clicked on this video if you don't already know what Jujutsu Kaisen, or JJK as it is popularly called, is all about. As such, I'll try to skim through the introduction and give you a brief rundown for the sake of preserving the integrity of this video essay. I mean, what sort of analysis lacks an intro? Jujutsu Kaisen, also known as Sorcery Fight, is a story about Itadori Yuji, who finds himself in an ongoing conflict between sorcerers and curses after eating one of Sukuna's fingers to save a total stranger. I mean, Megumin Fushiguro.
Who?
Now, he must find and eat all of Sukuna's fingers, after which he will be executed by the Jujutsu Society so that the looming threat of the King of Curses will be snuffed out forever, to say the least. As you can see from the synopsis alone, this story is gloomy. And not only is the protagonist's path burdened with difficulty, but his end is also tragic, to say the least. As the readers, we can already see what awaits Yuji after achieving his goals, and as the protagonist whose fate is already sealed, Yuji accepts this. In fact, he wants to do this. Of course, he doesn't walk this path without company. He has Megumin Fushiguro, the stranger whom he ate the finger to save, Nobara Kugisaki, a girl from the country who desires to eat it big in the city, and of course, my glorious king, my eternal Lord and Savior, my white-haired and blue-eyed honored one in all of the heavens and the earth, Gojo Satoru, the strongest Jujutsu sorcerer in modern times, as well as the subject of a lot of cross-verse battles for some reason. Honestly, I don't know what the point is with all these battles when we know Gojo solos in the end, but I digress.
Man, what the fuck is you talking about?
What the fuck was that?
I'm sorry, man.
Yuji is surrounded by all of these people, as well as other allies like Principal Yaga, Todo, and that driver who wears glasses and is only useful for making veils. But we as the readers still understand that the path that he walks is one he treads alone. Only he can do what he does. Only he is fated to die. And he is fine with it, as long as he can save even one more person and bear a responsibility that keeps so many people, the women, the children, safe from the hands of Ryumen Sukuna. He is ready to sacrifice his life. His end goal is even to die surrounded by people, just like he promised his grandfather. But as is the case with a lot of shonen stories, Jujutsu Kaisen becomes less about that personal journey and the internal conflict that Yuji faces, and instead becomes more focused on what I like to call the external conflict, which is what Jujutsu Kaisen is known for now more than anything else. Fights, fights, fights. Which brings us to the final arc of the story, Shinjuku Showdown. There is a joke that has somehow solidified into reality regarding JJK fans, which I'm sure you must have heard before. Most Jujutsu Kaisen fans cannot read. Or rather, they do not read. It's of course not to be taken literally. What it represents is that a lot of consumers of Jujutsu Kaisen are more interested in the epic fights that the story features, and they are less interested in what the speech bubbles or subtitles are saying. It's not like many can understand a lot of what is being said, especially when it features certain complicated curse techniques that can make you have a migraine. Don't get me started on that. Whether or not you agree with the joke, you can't deny that it is indeed the current perception of a lot of people regarding Jujutsu Kaisen. The central element that draws people to it is the fights. And why shouldn't it be, right? I mean, the name is Sorcery Fight. So shouldn't fight be what it is all about? In a sense, I agree. But what kind of fight? Is it the internal fight or the external fight? Or maybe, just maybe, a nice blend of the both of them. See, even though a lot of the fights in JJK are hyped and memorable, inspiring numerous edits on TikTok and fight breakdowns on YouTube, especially the further down Jujutsu Kaisen goes in the story, I would like to remind everyone of what made those fights spectacular to begin with. Sure, these fights are flashy and feature a pretty cool power system. JJK's fights and the application of cursed energy into cursed techniques are amazing to look at, especially when they are elevated by the stellar animation of MAPPA Studios. But they aren't the main drive that pushes these fights from being just cool to being memorable. Just hold on. I promise this will all make sense pretty soon. Whether it's the fight in the school exchange event, the Shibuya incident, or the much later Calling Games and Shinjuku showdown, there's something about the external conflict that draws us in and makes us so invested. It's the internal conflict. Right now, JJK is popularly known for its external conflict because in a sense the show has devolved into that kind of action shonen by placing more emphasis on it rather than the internal conflict that made it etched in my mind to begin with. See, JJK and I have something of a rough history. I started watching the anime after the first few episodes were out back in the day, and once I was caught up with that, I went to the only place I could go to get more of that story, the manga. However, after experiencing the traumatic event that was Junpei Yoshino's transfiguration at the hands of Mahito, I couldn't go on. I mean, I finished that whole arc, but after that, I just had to pause reading the manga. I just couldn't go on. The anime kept releasing content that everyone around me was buzzing on about it, but I couldn't bring myself to watch it. And that was because I knew what was waiting for me if I watched those episodes. The dread I felt back then was so palpable that I felt my heart churn whenever I thought of it. Imagine that, being so scared to watch something that you've already seen happen. After stalling and contemplating for a while, I finally decided to resume watching the anime. And it was indeed as fun as everyone told me. MAPPA really elevated the source material and made the story even more enjoyable than it was in the manga. Then, it got to that dreaded moment, Junpei Yoshino's downfall. I still remember how I shouted at the screen, hoping that he could hear me. I remember yelling, praying that the anime changed that one thing. I felt helpless, frustrated, just like Yuji. As I watched Mahito put his hand on that boy, I told myself, surely it won't happen again, right? After all, the anime showed Junpei in the opening credits, and I have seen some anime that stray from the source material. Maybe this would be one of those stories. I prayed silently while screaming loudly, hoping Yuji would run, punch Mahito in the face, and save Junpei from that tragedy that awaited him. I hoped and hoped and hoped even more, but those hopes were crushed. Junpei was transfigured, and as I sat watching all of it, I felt the same helplessness I felt back when I read the manga for the first time. That ache in my heart, that rage that burned in my chest, and the rising hatred for the one who was responsible for such tragedy. Mahito the cursed spirit. Man, it was so cathartic watching Yuji beat up Mahito, and the combo he made with Nanami as they jumped Mahito remains one of my best moments in JJK.
Fight back! Fight back!
Overall, it's an experience that I will never forget. But why? It's not like I haven't seen people die in media before. Even JJK, people have died before that incident. After all, Mahito had already transfigured other people before it was Junpei's turn. But there was something different about Junpei. The story cared about him. Yuji cared about him. And so, I cared about him. The attachment we have towards something is without a doubt as real as that thing we're attached to, and once it vanishes, we feel the pain of that loss. See, that raw pain that Yuji felt was shared by me and a lot of fans who also experienced that moment. Now that is peak JJK. Mixing in that internal conflict, the strife that exists within the characters we watch that resonate with us, and the external conflict, the battle that we see, which is visually stimulating and can either be cathartic or disappointing. See, Jujutsu Kaisen understood that formula, and that was what sets it apart from a lot of action shonen. For that reason alone, it shot up in popularity because of this reason. I mean, the amazing animation and aesthetic drew people in, but see, these factors were what made them stay. Jujutsu Kaisen doesn't have the most complex plot, and the world building is bland, to say the least. Yes, I can confidently say that now that the story is over. However, the themes that drive the internal conflict, as well as the events that make them so effective, coupled with the character writing that evoke powerful emotions in the audience, that is what makes JJK. Over time though, I found myself growing disinterested in the story of JJK. I initially thought it was because of how busy I had become or some other reason, but after some deep introspection, I now understand why. JJK lost that balance of internal and external conflict that it once had. The Shibuya incident remains peak JJK for me since it features such high stakes, an incredible cast of characters, and a delectable mix of internal and external conflict. However, down the line into the calling games, I found myself growing more distant from JJK. I caught up to the manga and kept up with the updates, but stopped entirely after a while with the excuse that I was going to just wait until the chapters piled up. I didn't want to face the ugly truth that I had somehow lost interest in Jujutsu Kaisen. Honestly, the Shinjuku showdown still feels like a fever dream, even though it just concluded. I had no idea it had lasted for so long, but I guess that's what happens when you lose track of time while having fun. If there is one thing I can use to describe the final arc, I would say it's fun. Yes, Gojo vs Sukuna was fun. I mean, why else would there be so many JJK memes and brain rot content that hit their peak during this period? Lobotomy Kaisen was birthed in this era as well, and you can tell why. Jujutsu Kaisen was pure gas, and I was all here for it, but something was missing. Gojo vs Sukuna lasted so long, but I never complained or felt it was dragging on for too long. The story had been building up to this conflict for a while now, and I, just as with many fans, was looking forward to it. Many people will say that they expected Gojo to lose, and I would say I was one of those people. I prefer Gojo to Sukuna by far, but I still knew that my blue-eyed king was going to go down, which is why it surprised me when I saw Gojo dominating Sukuna, even with all the odds stacked against him. Gojo was proving himself to be that strong. It honestly felt like Gege was edging us, the audience, drawing us closer and closer to the finale, like lambs to the slaughter, only for him to pull the rug from under us. Gojo died. Gojo freaking Satoru died. It was a dark era for JJK, and honestly, where it's peaked for me, in my opinion. I mean, Shibuya incident is still my favorite arc in all of JJK, but Gojo vs Sukuna is my best fight in Jujutsu Kaisen, period. Even though the fight didn't have as much emotional weight as some fights in Shibuya and was lacking some of that irresistible internal conflict, it's made up for it with a ton of action that had been anticipated since the start of the show. It was just such a shame to see Gojo go out like that. I knew he would lose, but I never thought he would actually die. It felt like Junpei all over again. But unlike with Junpei, I was let down by what came afterwards, the Sukuna gauntlet. In fact, back then, I remember being upset by Gojo mentioning that Sukuna was much stronger than him and how Sukuna was still holding back. He was even saying stuff about Sukuna still being capable of defeating him even without the 10 shadows.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
I should have seen it at the time that this was the foreshadowing of what was to come. And by that, I mean a convoluted mess of a final battle between Sukuna and everyone. From the overuse and abuse of binding vows to the several predictable plot threads that stretched for tens of chapters involving what is now referred to as the Sukuna cycle. It goes like this. A new opponent arrives to face Sukuna. The new opponent damages Sukuna. The new opponent looks like they have a chance against Sukuna. It is revealed that Sukuna was holding back or has a hidden card. Sukuna obliterates the new opponent. Rinse and repeat. This was when a lot of fans began to notice what I had seen before the Sukuna cycle even became a thing. Jujutsu Kaisen, which used to be all about the fine mix of internal and external conflict, had just become a sloppy mess of just the external. Don't get me wrong, it was still all fun and hype, but it wasn't memorable. At least not to me. Especially after thinking that Megumin was long gone after the series of events that had happened, only for him to somehow miraculously come back and they had a chance at saving him. You remember how badly I wanted the anime to change Junpei's end, right? But instead, he gave me a big fuck you and went ahead with it. I felt miserable at the time, but I am happy they did that and stuck with it. It made that experience memorable. But not only is Megumi somehow alright after everything, but so is Nobara, even after she was killed by Mahito. I sort of had a feeling that she was still alive, sure, but I expected her to be brought back much earlier, or at least in a better manner than the convenient way she was reinserted into the story. All for what? Shock value. For real? JJK has a lot of shocking moments, but they usually have a lot of weight and purpose backing them up. Not this time. Bottom line, they defeat Sukuna, and Yuji stands over the blobby remains of what used to be the glorious king of curses. However, instead of the catharsis I felt when Yuji defeated Mahito, I was left hollow. It didn't matter much to me. There was no internal conflict that stirred within me that made me genuinely shout from the bottom of my belly to the point where my throat ached. It was just cool. It was fine. Not bad, but not as good. Especially for the big bad of the story. I couldn't even be bothered about the aftermath of the event because I already somewhat knew that it would end unsatisfactorily. But I still let it play out as I flipped through the pages. It was disappointing that they couldn't conclude the arcs of a lot of characters, especially the students. The story even seemed to have forgotten all about Todo. That now makes me think that it was just a prop for plot conveniences. Anytime Yuji needed help and Todo would just pop up, And so, after a few chapters that show the aftermath of the final battle in Shinjuku, all of which have been underwhelming so far, we finally arrive at the final chapter of the story, Jujutsu Kaisen's epilogue. What is left to say? A lot of you must have already seen the leaks or probably read the chapter yourselves. I don't think I'll be saying anything special or different from what the others have already said. I wouldn't say the end was disappointing for me though. After all, I held no expectation for it at that point. JJK isn't at all a bad story, but it had strayed so much from what I thought it was, what I needed it to be. The dark path that Yuji walked alone, and the lonely road that led to his execution. The inevitable tragedy that we as readers know about but cannot do anything about. I thought JJK would stick to that, or at least something related. I thought my experience of the Junpei incident was a foreshadowing of the emotions not only I, but the rest of the fandom would feel once we arrived at the finale of the story. The strong desire to change the fate that is set in stone, watching powerlessly as something we do not want happens before our very eyes. I am not a masochist by any means, but there is something that is compelling about tragedy. There is something unforgettable about regret, about pain. And I thought JJK was going to do that. I mean, it did bring pain to a lot of the readers in the end, but not in the way that is actually good. The final chapter is pretty ordinary. Honestly, it's pretty consistent with JJK's style, and the art is clean, good to look at, easy to follow. It tells a simple, self-contained, one-off adventure of the trio. Yuji is no longer walking his path alone. Not that there is a path to walk anymore. I don't like the character assassination of Gojo in the end, since I really don't think Gojo would tell Yuji all that stuff. In the end, Gojo was still inherently selfish, but he still cared about his students, right? Even if he wanted them to surpass him, he wouldn't have worded it that way, that they should just forget him. What do I know anyway? It's not like I'm the one who wrote the story. Or am I?
Man, shut your bitch ass up, nigga. Nobody asked you that a bitch ass thing.
Okay, that wasn't even a good joke. But you know what a good joke is? Jujutsu Kaisen's ending. Whether it is Sukuna's interaction with Mahito at the end of the chapter, or the lack of a proper tribute to Gojo, or the unfinished arc of so many characters in the show, it's a colossal joke of a conclusion. How ironic is it that we got a proper tribute for Gojo in reality than we got in the actual manga? I especially like the fuck you sign in the form of Sukuna's finger at the end of the chapter, which is probably Gege's way of trolling us for the last time. All jokes aside though, do you think that was his intention from the very start? I don't even know at this point. But yeah, these are my thoughts on JJK as a whole and my opinion on its ending. It wasn't memorable at all. I heard from someone that JJK won't be relevant 5 to 10 years after its conclusion. And while there are a lot of justifications, a lot of arguments that can be made to the contrary, after reading that final chapter, I find myself compelled to agree. What about you watching? What do you think about the final chapter of JJK? Or what are your thoughts regarding the story in general? Do you have any theories, hopes, or conflicting thoughts to mine? Let me know in the comments down below, since I'm genuinely curious about what people think about the Jujutsu Kaisen and whether they like it, whether they don't. And please remember to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Yeah, cheers.